I definitely don't need to eat Ben and Jerry's right now, but I did today. Well, since we're here and I got my screen up here in the minute or so that we have before people come in. I'll show you my Facebook post. Like I said, I don't post a lot, and I do that to some extent so that people don't get inundated with my personal information, which quite frankly isn't that interesting. But I did post today. Mike, we can't see it here, including your wife and screen. But so finally some good news. And so Mike had read this. I can go back to Ben and Jerry's for summer. They announced today that Ben and Jerry's they've reached an agreement. Unilever, which owns Ben and Jerry's, reached an agreement with the people that own the license in Israel already. This guy Avi Zenger that they mentioned here, Avi Zenger owned it already. That was the name of the company that was licensing it before. They basically allowed them to essentially buy whatever they needed to beyond just a license. They basically allowed Unilever to say that it's the owner. Now, I do want to show you why this is important. So the fact that Mike brought this up is actually interesting about the BDS. So hopefully everybody can hear. So here's the statement. I'm not going to redo the whole statement. Say right here, Unilever completely and repudiates unequivocally any form of discrimination, intolerance, blah, blah, blah. That's blah, blah, blah language. Anti-Semitism, no place. Okay, fine. But here's the kid. We have never expressed any support for the investment sanctions movement and have no intention of changing that position. Unilever is very proud of our business in Israel. Now, remember something. Unilever is a huge multinational company, which makes so many products that's not even worth mentioning how many, because I'll leave out most important ones. You're going to go, you forgot about that. But again, a lot of food, a lot of home care products, lots of cleaning supplies, all those great kind of things, right? So that was their statement. So again, it really doesn't change, makes it back to where it was before, but with a different licensing arrangement, right? So I am going to show you the comments because there was a really important comment here that I want to show you. So one of the comments that I got from one of my friends was this one. So people are all nice, great, whatever. Then you can see Carolyn Banger, a friend of mine who's Orthodox woman from Arizona. She posted this. She posted Ben and Jerry Twitter, which they said today, we are aware, I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see it. We are aware of the Unilever announcement. While he has taken this decision, we do not agree with it. Unilever's arrangement means Ben and Jerry's in Israel will be owned and operated by EQP. Our company will no longer profit from Ben and Jerry. So Carolyn was basically saying that that Ben and Jerry's is not profiting from it, and it was a way for them to continue with BDS. That's not the case. Okay. I responded, and then Ariel Boatman, who lives out here, Israeli, said, "This is a big win." He's Israeli. He wrote as it's good for all parties. He meant to say Unilever owns the rights, so Ben and Jerry's, Mr. Ben and Jerry can go pound sand. And then I wrote, Unilever's decision was a clear blow to the BDS movement. In 2 weeks, I get to enjoy in Yerushalayim, which I wrote is where it tastes best anyway. And then Hetty from Florida wrote, have a scoop for me. So there you can see. But again, the fact that I get to eat it in Jerusalem it'll taste even sweeter now. And like I said, I do not need to eat it, but I will enjoy it, and it'll definitely taste good going down. Again, the point that Ben and Jerry's was trying to make was that they wanted to make sure that to their brand people and to the people that follow them, which tends to be, as you know, a very liberal organization, more pro BDS than most companies in America, that they basically didn't agree with this decision. But that's why I say clearly it was against BDS, because otherwise Ben and Jerry folks wouldn't have made that statement. So it is a victory. Otherwise they wouldn't have said it. But it's almost like Ben and Jerry's is saying, well, it wasn't up to us. So it's a very good thing for anybody who does not like the BDS movement, which is most Jews and most people, virtually everybody who loves Israel, it doesn't agree with the BDS movement. This was a very good thing. And the irony, of course, is that Ben and Jerry's was started by two Jewish guys who both agreed and went along with the decision, even though they are not in charge of the company anymore. They're not even in charge of Ben and Jerry's. Forget the fact that they're not in Unilever. Yeah, they haven't owned it for 20 years, but they are very left-wing, and they are very much part of the mentality of people who would be your typical BDS supporter, though they're a little bit more nuanced. They're more sophisticated. I don't want to say that they're anti-Israel, because they're not, but the net effect of supporting this boycott was to support and to encourage BDS. So it was a good thing. And I hadn't gone into a Ben I hadn't bought anything off their shelves in a year. So
been more like 22 years for me.
Mike's not a fan, but yeah,
I can't eat ice cream.
he can't eat it. I know, but
I haven't eaten for a couple of years, but you realize how much, I don't know about Ben and Jerry's, but do you realize how much it's gone up? The price?
oh, I'm sure.
Oh, Dairy Queen, for the smallest blizzard is $7.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, anyways, the good news is they're not participating in this anymore, and it's a good thing. I mean, there's no way, even if you don't want to eat Ben and Jerry's, and even if you don't care about ice cream, it's a good thing that this happened, because there were companies in America that were going to be divesting from Ben and Jerry's and Unilever because of this decision. There had already been several states had already started looking at how they were divesting from the company. So there are laws now in America, and not only on national level, but on state levels, that companies are not allowed to participate in the BDS movement at all. Several states, and not all states that you'd assume, like Kansas, and it's not just states with a Jewish community. I think Oklahoma has an anti-BDS law. Pretty much states where people didn't want to be against Israel and make sure that their states didn't do anything that would be complicit, pass laws to not allow it. So anyways, as I said, a little bit of political news that hopefully, look, I'm sure someone's going to be offended that I did it, but I can't do anything about it, because you can't have ice cream. Mike is offended on the grounds of ice cream, but not on the grounds of being anti-Israel. I want to make it very clear. Mike loves Israel.
I do.
He just doesn't like the fact he can't eat ice cream. I don't even think he's offended by ice cream. He's offended by the fact that he can't eat ice cream.
Offended by you.
Okay, by me. All right. As long as it's not the ice cream, as long as you're not anti-ice cream. All right. So, oh man, I could eat some right now. Anyways, no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I don't want, no, seriously, I really don't need to eat it. No, I don't. Seriously, I don't. So, no. Oh. It was it was a shutout before. Anyway, so last week we read about the burning bush text, and it ends with Moses again refusing and basically coming up with excuses. And finally, I'll just show you the part here that God finally says to him, look,
Choice.
look. He became angry with Moses and he says, there's your brother Aaron, the Levite. He is now, he I know speaks readily, and even now he's setting out to meet you. So Moses's argument, I don't speak well, I can't speak well. He says, fine. God finally says, fine, I will. First of all, God says, I made you this way. If I know how you speak, then you must be okay. But he doesn't listen to him. And so he finally says he won't listen. Yeah, this is the first time we've actually met Aaron. We have never heard of Aaron. But before you say, oh, well, we know a lot about his family, as we've said before, but some of you were not here last week or the week before. On the contrary, we know nothing about his family. We know nothing about Moses' family. And you'll see today how little we knew about it, because we actually learn about it in chapter 6, which I never even realized until, like, I don't know, maybe about 30, 25 years, where somebody pointed this chapter until chapter 4, and you never even heard. So we're going to take a look at it. We might just finish with that. We didn't even hear Miriam's name. It says his sister. It says his sister. We will actually not hear her name. Well, you'll see. Yeah, quite a ways down. So we finished with so after burning bush, after again, God tells him these miracles that he has. Remember, in addition to the plagues, Moses has a bag of tricks that he has, right? He has 3 tricks. 3 tricks. He has a staff that turns into a snake. He has a hand that he can put into his garment and pull out. He's got not a rabbit, he's got scales on his, he's got skin disease. He puts it back in, pulls it out, it's gone. And then, of course, the last thing he can do is he can turn the Nile to blood. That'll be the plague, right? That'll be a plague. But these other ones are other miracles that he has. As we said before, and as I already told you, today we are going to just crack the plague. Maybe not today. We'll get real close to the plagues. The Torah portion we're about to read will be a portion of the plagues, Vayera. But as I mentioned to you before, this is first 5 chapters are all part of the first Torah portion. So in this parsha, which we usually read about in January, it's a lot. It goes all the way through Moses' birth to the burning bush to Moses. In the first chapter, he's not even born. He's born at the beginning of chapter 2. He's born, or the Israelites are enslaved. He's born in chapter 2. Chapter 3 is the burning bush. Chapter 4, end of middle ways, is also still burning bush, but then he goes back. He tells his father-in-law, right here, I'm going back to Egypt. And in chapter 4, end of 4, 5, he's back in Egypt. So the first week's Torah portion has all that in it, or the first parsha of Exodus, the first Torah has all that. So we really don't have a lot about Moses when you think of all that being in the first parsha. Quite a lot. So again, God says to him, go back, because those who you are dead, which is a weird line, because doesn't he go back to Egypt because you told him to be part of the, and that's where we left off, because he goes back to his family, and this is where we left off. Let my son go, which is not, again, the son, but you go to Pharaoh and say, let my son go, meaning the Israelites, that he may worship me. Yet you refuse to let him go. Now I will slay your firstborn son. So this is all what Moses is going to say to Pharaoh. God's already told him from the very first moment, virtually, I'm going to kill the firstborn. So you and I go, well, maybe there was, an out for the Israelites, for the Egyptians to have. Maybe there was a way for them to get off that off ramp before they got hit by it. No. God told Moses, I'm going to kill their firstborn children. I will tell you the authorship issue is important, and I'll get to it in a second, because this idea that we've always had that there's 10 plagues because we celebrate Passover, but we don't read the Bible, is critical, because we're not really sure there's 10 plagues. No, there's 10 plagues in the Torah. Just not sure. We're just not sure who said there were 10 plagues, because nowhere in the Bible does it say there's 10 plagues. Won't see that so much this week, but we'll see it for sure next week. All right. All right. So here we are as we begin. As I told you last week, with the most unexplainable, perhaps, verse in the whole Torah, three verses. It begins in verse 24. At a night encampment on the way, Adonai encountered him and sought to kill him. So Zipporah took out a flint and cut off her son's foreskin and touched his legs with it, saying, "You are truly a bridegroom of blood to me." And when God let him alone, she added, "A bridegroom of blood because of the circumcision." Now, the next verse says, and God said to Aaron, "Go meet Moses in the wilderness." So these three verses, let's just look at for a second, because the next verses I just showed you does not have anything to do with that. By the way, the word God there in brackets is not there. It just says, and when he let him, or when, again, the Hebrew is when the masculine verb, let him alone, she added a bridegroom of blood because of the circumcision. So let's just look at those three verses, because those three verses are by themselves. And by the way, according to the authorship issue, it's by the J author, who isn't been around actually all the time in this story. There's been a lot of E author and a lot of the priestly author we're about to see. But this is not, and whoever the author is, what just happened? So, okay, Mike just said a very important thing. Who's him? Yes, there are pronouns used here floating around all over the place, but we don't know what happens exactly and who it happened even to. The only person who we know is named is Zipporah. She's the only woman in this situation. And so she is named, it says, Zipporah. What is happening here? I will start off by saying, I've talked to many biblical scholars about this, people I trust implicitly with their understanding of Torah and linguistics and archaeology and history. They have no idea what's happening here. Virtually everyone just says, maybe it's this, maybe it's that.
What do the ancient rabbis say?
The rabbis don't really know what to do with this, though they do explain it. I will maybe start there. But let's first just explain what happened, or what we see happens, what we can actually see, what the text actually says. At a night encampment is a place like a hotel. The Hebrew that's used here is a malon, which is the same word we use today in Hebrew for a hotel. So, but the night encampment's fine. What's the King James have for that? The INN, an inn, at the inn. Good translation too. Encampment sounds more like it's a camp. Like it could be. I mean, it's a caravan stop, most likely. It's a place where people stayed overnight that was not their house. That's where it happens. Maybe a Motel 6, because this is a crazy thing. Because you do not want to stay at this Motel 6, because God attacks people at this Motel 6. Because it says Adonai encountered him and sought to kill him. Now it says that it's God. Now, well, I won't tell you the rabbis yet. I almost did. Finish with what's here, because you got to first start with what the text says. Then Zipporah took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin. That is clear that the foreskin that is taken off is her son's. That's clear. But we don't know whose legs she touches the foreskin after it's been cut off to. And that happens as well. And the words that she says is, you are a bridegroom of blood to me. The words chatan damim mean a bridegroom of blood. But it seems as though that maybe those words should be in capitals, because it seems like the words chatan damim are a thing, like a title. And then the next line is, and when God let him alone, she added a bride because of the circumcision. So she saves Moses, her son. She saved somebody. She saved somebody. Now, look, that's what the text says. What? Couldn't be Moses. Why? Well, couldn't be Moses what?
The first line, today's that I don't know I was going to kill.
Why?
Because God sent him
Yeah, right?
to Pharaoh.
So you assume, why would God now trap? Is God tricking him? And why is now whatever happened, whatever ritual that just happened, why is that enough? And was Moses not circumcised, or was the kid not circumcised? We assume it's the kid. I mean, well, wait, no, we know the kid is circumcised. That's not what I was going to say. We know the bridegroom of blood, or I shouldn't say we don't know. Is the bridegroom of blood her husband? It would seem as though when she says the bridegroom of blood that she's talking to Moses. Why would she call her son her bridegroom?
Right.
And again, it could have said groom, because the word chatan means groom. We don't usually say bridegroom, but it's a groom. It's the guy who gets in the marriage. So why would she refer to her son as so we don't know what just happened. We assume from the standpoint, not yet what the rabbi said, but we assume, though part of this the rabbis do agree with, that her son was not circumcised. And by the way, she has two sons, so we don't know, and they have two sons. We don't know which one this was to. Was it one? Was it both? We assume, though, that she circumcised her son and did something with the foreskin and touched his legs with it. Did she touch his legs with it, or did she touch Moses's legs with it?
I was thinking she touched his legs with it.
Who's he? Her son?
Her son.
Maybe,
No, not necessarily.
but we don't know. The problem is nobody knows, and we don't know what this ritual is. And it's so crazy because why is God attacking anybody? They're doing God's work. They're going back to Egypt no matter what. They're all there in this night encampment on their way from Midian back to Egypt to do God's work.
Maybe there's a third person.
And now they're getting attacked. Who's the third person?
I don't know. Maybe we don't know that.
We don't know, because this story just sits out in the middle of there. And I will tell you this, most of the time the people do not want to deal with this, meaning the rabbis, the commentators, people don't want to deal with it. Let's just take a look real quick at like, for example, the commentaries on this. Let's look at Rashi's commentary. The angel sought to do this because he had not circumcised his son Eliezer, and because he had showed himself remiss in this, he brought upon him the punishment of death. It has been taught in a Baraita, right, which are texts the rabbis wrote 2,000 years ago. Right, this is a Baraita that was quoted in the Talmud. Rabbi Yossi said, God forbid that this was so. Moses had not been remiss in this duty, but he thought, if I circumcise him and immediately proceed on the journey, the child's life will be in danger for 3 days. If, on the other hand, I circumcise him and wait 3 days, the Holy One, blessed be he, commanded me, go return to Egypt. Consequently, he obeyed his command, intending to circumcise the child as soon as the opportunity presented itself. There was, therefore, no remissness on his part. Remissness. Why then was he threatened with punishment? Because he busied himself with the affairs of the lodging place first. because when he arrived at the inn, he troubled himself with eating and drinking. He should have first circumcised his son, being now so much nearer Egypt. The danger that follows upon the circumcision was not so great, since the interval of time between the oppression, between the oppression and between the operation and his arrival in Egypt was now shorter than if he had circumcised him before he set out on the journey. The angel became a kind of serpent and swallowed him. Moses from his head to his thigh spewed him forth, and then again swallowed from his legs to that place, the membrum. Zipporah thus understood this, and it happened on the account of the delay in the circumcision of her son. I know that seems very confusing, and let me summarize what they said and what, again, is a possibility. The rabbis definitely don't like the fact that God himself attacked Moses. They don't like that, right? They don't like that. So it's an angel. And the angel becomes like a big snake. And the angel starts, this is the Midrash, starts sucking up Moses, swallowing him. And he gets to his midsection. Zipporah runs and cuts off the circumcises her son, takes the foreskin, puts it on Moses's penis, and that's what stops the angel snake from swallowing Moses any further, and it releases him. It's a little weird, but the Midrash is basically following this idea that the foreskin was placed on Moses. Now, it says in the translation on his legs. The issue is the word raglav is the same word for penis as it is for legs. It's a euphemism for it. And so the Midrash fully understands that, that's what happened, that this was a transference of the foreskin to Moses's foreskin, as if to say, Moses messed up by not circumcising him, and so therefore we circumcised him. The blood now takes away that responsibility, and we're all good to go now. Now, I will tell you that there is this other sense that somehow this chatan damim, this bridegroom of blood, it has nothing to do with circumcisions and Moses not doing circumcisions on his son, but actually has to do with this issue, which is, go back to Egypt, for those who sought to kill you are dead. And the next line, which comes right after it, which was, that Aaron comes and sees him in the next sentence, and that this reunion now allows Moses to go back to Egypt. That somehow this ritual absolved Moses of the murder of the Egyptian when he was back in Egypt. Because remember, the last thing that Moses did in Egypt was he killed a man, and he never paid the price for it. Now, even the rabbis have to admit, maybe there's something wrong with that. Maybe there has to be some kind of guilt and forgiveness or expiation for that murder, that Moses has to do this, or Zipporah has to do it for him, to cleanse him and to allow him to now go through. That is a possibility that's alluded to in this idea of the chatan damim. Because when we see this phrase chatan damim, a bridegroom of blood, the word damim are oftentimes used for blood that is spilled in murder. Because damim is oftentimes used not like just blood, but like blood that was spilled. It's the plural word, right? Damim is the plural of blood, right? It means bloods, right? And so it seems as though when we hear that word damim, which we did, by the way, back in Genesis, when Cain kills Abel, he says, your brother's blood, damim, your out to me, which the rabbis interpret to mean that when you kill somebody, you don't just kill that person, but you kill every person that would have come out of that person, all the potential that came from that person. And that's why when you murder somebody, you're not just shedding their blood, but everybody else's blood who would come from them. So that's a possibility, that there had to be this ritual of essentially almost like you had to pay for your crime. That this, no, they're all together, but that this is connected to this issue of why does it say that the person who died, I mean, the people who wanted to kill you are dead now, which seems to, as long as there's a blood avenger out there, which by the way is another thing the Torah talks about, a blood avenger, somebody who can kill you because you killed their relatives. There seems to be maybe that here too. It's a possibility. So does it have to do with the circumcision? Does it have to do with Moses' murder?
But what Rashi said made kind of sense to me, except for the first part, where it's an angel, because it says in the Torah, Adonai.
Yeah, and that gets back to this issue of where I say the rabbis are really not very helpful, because they cannot wrap their heads around this line of the Torah that seems as though it's God.
Right.
And they don't like that. Because again, he's just doing what God told him to go back. So then they got into this weird, Rashi got into this weird question of whether he's responsible for not circumcising his son and whether he didn't do it fast enough and whether he should have done it before they left. First of all, we don't even know how old this kid is. They're assuming that this kid was just born because he's not circumcised yet. Kid could have been 10 years old. So the whole discussion is a weird one because they just went to this.
Why wasn't he circumcised?
We don't know if any of the Israelites.
Mark wasn't there.
Well, no, we don't know whether they were circumcised. We don't know whether they're circumcised in Egypt. We don't know if the Jews had stopped doing circumcision because it seems as though in Egypt, the Israelites stopped doing circumcision, which is weird because the Egyptians did do circumcision. It's not like the Egyptians didn't do circumcision. They did. They're actually culturally, anthropologically, people who it wouldn't have been an issue for. The Greeks didn't like circumcision, and Jews during the Greek and Roman times were uncomfortable with it because their neighbors were uncomfortable with it. As we know, there's even cases of Jews who tried to undo their circumcisions during the Greco-Roman times so they wouldn't look different. Which again, you're saying to yourself, how would they even know? Why? Because they went to the gymnasium
How could they do that?
with a lot of pain.
I would imagine.
By the way, if you want to visualize it really well,
No.
which I don't really want to, I don't encourage it. Go read James Missioner, The Source. If you go back to those pages, I remember reading that in that book. It's a great book. It's a 900 something page book, but the pages that really stick out in my mind are the stories in Missioner's story during the Greco-Roman period when he's made that come back to life. He actually writes about a Jewish guy competing in the gymnasia who undoes his circumcision. So yeah, people did it. And I will tell you that is part of this. Oh, by the way, one other thing. Why do we know about circumcision? Because it says when the Israelites came back when they were about to cross over the land, what did? They all had to circumcise with Joshua. They made a mountain of foreskins. It's called the Mountain of Foreskins. And they cross over into the land. We read this. We read this a few months ago on Tuesday morning when we were reading Joshua, the book of Joshua, right there at the beginning of Joshua, the Israelites circumcised themselves. Now, we don't know, and by the way, the rabbis don't like the idea that people didn't circumcise in Egypt. There's actually a midrash that they did, but when they were in the wilderness, they didn't go through circumcision. And they all got circumcised. That next generation got circumcised when they came in. But this issue of circumcision is obviously, but it almost seems as though in this case, and this is what some of the people that I have one of my professors years ago wrote a paper about this, about it. I said, what's this about? And he goes, well, I actually wrote a paper about this. And he pulled it out, and I think I still have it. That the circumcision and the blood issue are combined together. Torah is able to circumcise her son and at the same time do this expiation for Moses so that he can come back into paid the price for them however many years ago. We don't know how many years ago, it never says. However many years before, back in chapter 2, where before he came to Midian, he killed that Egyptian, he never paid the price. He ran away. Well, he was saving someone, but maybe you still need to do some kind of something if you've killed somebody, even if it's self-defense. Well, it really wasn't self-defense. He was defending another Israelite. But anyways, we just don't know. At the end of the day, most people don't ever read these passages because they're too weird. And when they talk about it, they basically say, we don't know. Get it. Look, we never talk about it with kids. How do you even explain that? But that's in anybody who's got.
How could you describe a mountain of foreskins?
Well, that's not in the mountain, but yes. How do you do the bridegroom of the blood, the Hatan Damim? Because of a circumcision, by the way. It does say because of the circumcision. I don't know. I don't know what to say other than this is why the Bible is not for kids. Because whatever just happened here, I don't ever want to explain that to a kid. Never. God forbid some kid has this as their Torah portion and they come to me and say, Rabbi, I was reading through my whole portion and I want to know, what does this mean? That's a question that's never happened. I don't want it to happen. I actually am not sure about that. I think someone was reading it once while we were reading that, and then they asked me about it in class. But I think they read ahead. No, I did, but I was like, you asked a very good question that I'd never wanted to answer to a kid. So now, any other questions or comments? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what to say other than that we just read. And I will tell you that even after saying that, I think it's one of those. Yes, there's a context that's missing. We don't understand the words. This is a perfect example of a contextual issue that we don't even understand what they're talking about, because they knew what they were talking about. They knew what a Chatan Damim is, and they didn't need to explain it. But there probably was another piece of that story that we don't have.
That's amazing that the editors left it in.
Why did they leave that in without giving the context? The only thing I could say is that by the time that this was edited, by the time that at least that version of it was there with that text, they still knew what that meant. They still had some reason to say Moses went through this ritual. I will just tell you this. We know nothing about Moses' life. I told you this before. We haven't even had his parents be named yet. And yet we know this. It's almost like, I don't even understand this. Tell me what his first name was. I don't even know what Moses' real name was.
Yeah.
I don't know what you don't know what his first name is.
It was bad.
All right, fine, Ben.
There's just too many.
Yeah, pronouns, just pronouns.
God in parentheses.
Yeah, that God's not there.
This says he with the H a small h. And so it's like,
Well, yeah, they have the H is small here. Well, that's definitely him. That's definitely Moses or the boy. But the God, yes, is not there. It's not there.
he, him, his.
And when he let him alone, or when he let him alone.
Is that what that is? If you took out God, it would be.
Yeah, when what's the King James say? What's verse 26?
So he let him go. He let him go.
Yeah,
All
there's the
four
he.
letters.
Uh-huh. They don't even use the God there.
Let him go.
Uh-huh.
Who he, who him.
Yeah. That's it.
Angel.
No comments? No comments from Zoom area? All right.
They're sleeping.
So we're gonna move on to the next part of this then, because
Spend hours.
I don't know. I do not know what else to say of something I really don't know, but I've given you everything that I have. So
It's been interesting when you were in school and studying this.
nobody wanted to study it. I'm the only one who ever asked that question.
Really?
I don't even think I asked that question in front of anybody. No, because most people don't know it's there. Most people, the 3 verses, you can go over the 3 verses and you. Everyone knows. Nobody wants to know. I wonder what the conservative, the Eitz Chaim is one of the last commentaries that was written on this. I wonder what those commentaries said on it. Probably not a lot, because again, nobody knows a lot about it. All right. So the next verse, how much further did they go? We don't know, because again, we knew that God was speaking to Aaron. Adonai said to Aaron, go to meet Moses in the wilderness. He went and met him at the mountain of God, and he kissed him. Well, if the mountain of God is where they were before, then Moses hasn't gone anywhere yet. So we don't really know where this is, other than the fact that, okay, since we're doing this, I will do this. We're very quick. I can't even see this right now. Hold it. Oh, because I have it blocked. Wait, sorry. Where did I put it?
What's the score, Mike?
I'm going to show this. Mike's giving the Dodger update in the meantime. Hold it one second. I will show you what I had bookmarked and then moved it around. Here. Okay. Let me just show this real quick. So here's the authorship by. So you see section right here is it goes to those 3 verses are the J author, and then the author doesn't come back until chapter 5. So the next verses are the E author, the LOS. Now again, what's confusing about it, and as I said before, I only show the authorship issue when it's important. But in this story, you seem to go from the burning bush, which it actually says the mountain's name in that one, Horeb, and then here it says it goes right to. It doesn't go right to it, but it's got. It goes to Moses' wife, faithful wife, whatever you want to call it. And Moses going back to this, which is Aaron part. This is important because, as I said, sometimes it's clear. And in this part, it just feels like it was in. It goes back to, now again, the confusing part is that normally the E author does not use the name, does not use the Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh name. The only difference is that when we get to the burning bush, the E author first time does use the name for God, the Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh name, because that's actually an important part of the author, is basically saying that Moses gets to hear that this is the name of God. And that's the first time that this author uses this name. So normally, my cursor is taking a long time here. But see, this is one of the key ways that you know it's the E author, is it does say Elohim. Everybody sees that? Elohim. So anyways, Aaron comes to see him. He says he went to him at the mountain of God and he kissed him. And Moses told Aaron all about the things that Adonai had committed to him and all the signs about which he had been instructed. Then Moses and Aaron went and assembled all the elders of the Israelites. Aaron repeated all the words that Adonai had spoken to Moses, and he performed the signs in the sight of those assembled. And the assembly was convinced when they heard that Adonai had taken note of the Israelites and that God had seen their plight, they bowed low in homage. So Moses puts on a show for the people, and Moses convinces them. It says he convinced them. But of course, Aaron is there too. Right? Aaron is with them. And What can you say about it? Right? Moses tells Aaron. Aaron tells Moses and Aaron go tell the people, and they're convinced. By the way, nowhere in what we just read, which is the very first time in the Bible that we've ever heard Aaron's name, nowhere in here is there ever any indication that the two of them don't know who each other are. They don't like that there's some animosity between them, that there's any problem between them, which you oftentimes have in the movies where Moses is an Israelite, is an Egyptian kind of guy, and Aaron's a good Israelite, and they live different lives, whatever. There's no indication that there's ever any problem here, that they don't know each other, that there's a problem. What?
They don't know each other
They don't? You don't think so?
before that. I don't think so.
I don't know. There's there's no indication here of what happened, but we don't have Aaron having any problem with Moses, which you have definitely in the Prince of Egypt, where Aaron doesn't even like Moses. So there you got it. Remember, it's Jeff Goldblum. He does the voice of Aaron. The only Jewish guy in the movie of the main characters. Jeff Goldblum's the only Jewish guy. Everybody else is or not Jewish.
What's the
Christian.
difference?
Michelle Pfeiffer is Tzipporah. She's not Israelite anyway, so that didn't count. But what's her name? Sandra Bullock plays Miriam. These are not anywhere close to being actors you associate with Jewish people. But then again, in the Ten Commandments, Edward G. Robinson's the only Jewish person in the movie.
That wasn't a real character.
Datan is a composite character. No, you're right. He's not mentioned, but Dathan or Datan is really the Korach Dathan combination. It's interesting that the only person that's Jewish in that movie is the bad guy.
Right.
The only Jewish guy in the movie, The Ten Commandments, they gave. Now he's a great actor, so nobody's gonna like.
He can't play a good guy 'cause he never played.
He never played a good guy, but he don't play a good guy there either. He plays a bad guy. So there you go. Anyways, that's the story. So Moses does his stuff. He does his stuff. He sees the stuff that they do, and that's the way chapter 4 ends. So chapter 4 begins with the burning bush, and it ends there. Now again, that's the way the Christian scholars decided to break it. You know, sometimes they break it along the lines of where portions are, and sometimes they don't. Not in this case. But here's the words that the next words, which I'm only going to tell you this because I am going to show you it again. This doesn't really make sense what happens here. So that's why I brought up the authorship issue, because I know somebody's going to say this doesn't make sense. I'll try to make it a little clearer in a moment.
It really doesn't make sense.
You haven't seen it yet. Afterwards, Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, "Thus says Adonai, the God of Israel, let my people go." It's right there. Ko Amar Adonai, Elohei Yisrael, right? Let my people go that they may celebrate a festival for me in the wilderness. It doesn't say let my people go so that they can leave Egypt and never come back. It doesn't say they're slaves and God doesn't want them to be slaves. Moses just goes and says, let them go so they can go celebrate a holiday. That's it. Let them go. But the implication seems to be they're going to come back. I don't know. Most people don't remember that, but that's what he says. Now, Pharaoh says, but Pharaoh said, who is Adonai that I should heed him and let Israel go? I do not know Adonai, nor will I let Israel go. So I don't know who you're talking about. Nowhere here, by the way, this is the first time that Moses and Pharaoh, according to this, they've never met. So if Pharaoh is really his brother who he hasn't seen for 20 years, there's no indication of that. There is, by the way, also no indication of how Moses got in to see Pharaoh, but that's not clearly what is of issue here, but that's it. afterwards. Doesn't say, by the way, how long afterwards Moses went to see Pharaoh. But here's their first meeting. Let my people go. They celebrate a festival. Both things are there. Let my people go. They celebrate a festival. And here's Pharaoh saying, I don't know who this God is. I don't know who God is. I will not let them go. They answered, remember, it's both of them, Moses and Aaron. They answered, the God of the Hebrews has become manifest to us. By the way, the God of the Hebrews doesn't say my God. It says the God of the Hebrews, right? Let us go, we pray, a distance of 3 days into the wilderness to sacrifice to our God, Adonai, lest God strike us with pestilence or sword. But the king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why do you distract the people from their tasks? Get to your labors. Now, Moses and Aaron say to Pharaoh, look, this is what the story is. God came to us. God appeared to us and told us we've got to go with the Hebrews. We have to go 3 days into the wilderness, which again seems to be, this is how far we're going to go. We're going to go worship God. Otherwise, we're going to be struck with pestilence and sword. Which is weird because like Pharaoh doesn't want Jews around, or, doesn't seem to like them. He's been killing them, throwing them in the Nile. You'd think he'd go, oh, okay, fine, good. God's going to kill them for me. So maybe that's what Moses and Aaron just again subverted their own plans, because if Pharaoh doesn't listen to them, then God's going to attack the people. Great, I won't let him go. He actually literally threw that out there. Now, of course, what's ironic about that, of course, is that that's not what's going to happen. The Egyptians are going to be hit with the plagues. It does not, by the way, say, it does say sword, right? We don't have a plague of sword, right? There's no sword plague. But it seems to be death and destruction. I would probably say that the sword is more symbolic of God destroying us rather than we're going to get killed by knives. But dever in the Hebrew, it's badever o becherev, which is almost like, it's almost poetic. The words are actually like, poetic together. So Pharaoh says, what are you talking about? Why are you distracting the people? Let them go back to their work. So that's Pharaoh so far. Pharaoh continued, the people of the land are already so numerous, and you would have them cease from their labors? That same day, Pharaoh charged the taskmasters and overseers of the people, saying, you shall no longer provide the people with straw for making bricks as heretofore. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. But impose upon them the same quota of bricks as they have been making heretofore. Do not reduce it, for they are shirkers. That is why they cry, let us go sacrifice to our God. Let heavier work be laid upon those involved. Let them keep at it and not pay attention to deceitful promises. And so the taskmasters and overseers of the people went out and said to the people, thus says Pharaoh, I will not give you any straw. You must go and get the straw yourselves wherever you find it, but there shall be no decrease whatever in your work. And the people scattered throughout the land of Egypt to gather stubble for straw. And the taskmasters pressed them, saying, you must complete the same work assignment each day as when you had straw. And the overseers of the Israelites, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten. Why, they were asked, did you not complete the prescribed amount of bricks, either yesterday or today, as you did before? Then the overseers of the Israelites came to Pharaoh and cried, why did you do this? Why did you deal thus with your servants? No straw is issued to your servants, yet they demand of us make bricks. Thus your servants are being beaten when the fault is with your own people. He replied, you are shirkers. That is why you say, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Be off now to your work. No straw shall be issued to you, but you must produce your quota of bricks. Now the overseers of the Israelites found themselves in trouble because of the order. You must not reduce the quality of bricks. And they left Pharaoh's presence, and they came upon Moses and Aaron standing in their path. And they said to them, may Adonai look upon you and punish you for making us loathsome to Pharaoh and his courtiers, putting a sword in their hands to slay us. That incident, those verses, are very, very strange because we don't usually talk about them. But it's a huge part of the story. This chapter 5 is the first time that Moses and Aaron appear before Pharaoh. And what happens? The net result is the work gets worse for them. And it is a disaster for the Israelites. Because now they have to get their own straw. They have to do the same amount of work. They get beaten more. And it says right here, there's actually two levels of people. There's the overseers of the Israelites, and there are Pharaoh's taskmasters. And what you see here is that they are the ones who go to Moses and say, why did you mess things up for us? Now, this is not a part of the Torah that people talk about. Because on one hand, they're like, well, what does this really tell us about Egypt? There's no miracles here. This is just a bunch of bad stuff. Well, it was. But I think it's actually highly important, and I'll tell you why. Because it shows that the Egyptians actually did something that we know people do when they have power over a minority or over people that they are controlling, is that they hire or put up people of that group to be over the other people. And they create a segment of the population that essentially is their, we would call them today, capos.
Isn't that what the character Ed Robinson?
Yes. And that is Dathan's character, exactly, Mike. Is that this is, Mike was just celebrating the fact the Dodgers won.
No, it didn't win. Belgium.
It's almost, I just got an alert too. But the point is that I saw Mike get very happy right now. But the point is that it was not because of what we just read, because this is actually a really sad reality. And it's one of the things that I think the Torah teaches us, that one of those takeaways where you go, oh, I never realized that this was in the Torah. That we have this problem that there were Jews that were used against the Jewish people, which again is the Edward G. Robinson character. But we know that it happened during the Holocaust.
Right. And
we know that it happened in other places where there were Jews that were enforcers and people who controlled the people. So we know that there's taskmasters. We know that there's Egyptians who their job is to make sure the work gets done. But there's also overseers. And those overseers are Israelites, because they're the ones who say to Moses, you deserve to be punished by God because you've made life worse for us. You've put a sword in their hands. You've actually enabled them now to have justification for punishing us more. And what's so sad about this is that the overseers, as bad as that job was and as bad as these people are for doing it, the reality is they actually, in their minds, are trying to do something. In their minds, they've rationalized it, is that we're trying to protect our people. And now you've given the Egyptians a reason to punish us harder. They don't say to Moses, thanks for making my job harder by itself. They literally said, you're putting a sword in their hands. We're gonna suffer this. We're gonna suffer more now because of you. Because of you, we're now going to be punished. Jews are going to die because of you. And that scene is a critical scene, I think, in the Torah that we don't talk about, which is the moment that Moses first goes before Pharaoh and it backfires. And at that point, right here, where the Israelites have come back to him and said, look what you've done. It's not a good moment.
This is still part of the first part, correct?
This is all still in the first parsha.
Everybody talks about the burning bush.
Everybody talks about the burning bush, even if they talk about Moses' birth. But Moses, if you think about it, is not off to a good start. But I will tell you that Moses has had this before, because in another very quick scene that we sometimes gloss over, way back in chapter 2, if you recall, Moses stopped an Israelite from being beaten, right? He stopped an Israelite from being beaten. But what happened in that scene, folks? Again, what happened in that scene? What happens? He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. He turned this way and that, killed him. The next day, he found two Hebrews fighting. He tried to stop him, and they said, who made you chief and rule over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Moses was frightened and thought the matter is known. Now, we always focus on the fact that this is how Moses finds out that he didn't kill anybody in secret. They all know it. But there's another issue here. Moses has been dealing with his people very little as a leader or as a person who has authority. In both scenes, both of these scenes, Moses, when he is dealing with his people, look at this. Both times, Moses is basically being told, get the hell out of here. We don't need you.
This keeps going on and on and on later.
Of course it does. Moses always has a problem with the people. But what's amazing is he doesn't ever seem to not have a problem with the people. Because his first two interactions with the people are basically ones where you'd think, how's that ever going to work out? He's 0 for 2, to use baseball parlance. He's struck out twice. Because every time he's had an opportunity so far to be a leader, the people have said, no, thank you. Get out of here. This time they actually said to him, God should punish you for what you've done. That's pretty harsh. May God punish you for what you've done to us. And guess what? Moses goes to God and says, oh Lord, why did you bring harm upon this people? Why did you send me? Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has dealt worse with his people, and you still have not delivered the people. Guess what? That's the end of the chapter. We're still not, by the way, at the end of the Parsha. We're almost at the end. We're still not there. So all of this is going on in the first portion. And Mike just pointed this out. I was going to point it out to you in about 5 verses because we're going to get to the next. But this has all happened in the same. If we're reading this on a weekly Parsha, think about that we actually read both scenes. We read the one from chapter 2 and we read the one at the end of chapter 5. It's both, exactly. They're both in there.
Is it the longest?
No, it's not the longest. But the first chapters of several of the books, at least, well, you can make the argument, 2 of them, Genesis and Exodus, both are quite a lot. Because remember, Genesis begins with creation and ends with Noah, the birth of Noah, which as far as time goes is definitely the longest. That's a couple thousand years.
Oh, yeah.
That's a couple thousand years. That's 10 generations just from Adam to Noah. And that's a long time. A lot happens. Cain and Abel story. I mean, all the creation stories, the Cain and Abel story, and then essentially, again, to right up to the flood. But this is a lot. And I would say, yes, from the standpoint of telling a story, Mike, this is a little too much to put into one story. But we don't know anything about his life. So here we got to the end of chapter 5. And all we know is that Moses somehow survives, his childhood, which is a miracle. We know that he lived in, we don't know how old he is. We know he's in Midian. We know he's come back. He's off to a horrible start. And now we begin chapter 6. Now we begin chapter 6. And this is the way it begins. God said to Moses, you shall soon see what I will do to Pharaoh. He shall let them go because of a greater might. Indeed, because of a greater might, he shall drive them from his land.
That's a weird,
It's a terrible break.
it is.
There's no reason why a new chapter should start here. This is one of the worst breaks in a chapter, because this is very much Moses and God speaking, and you've hit midway through a conversation. All of it starts here at the end. The last 2 verses, Moses comes back to him.
Mine isn't a long chapter.
No. Oh, so here's Vayera. So this is a perfect example of where the Jewish break makes a whole lot more sense than the Christian break, because this is a way. Now, again, we end with this because we want to end on a happy note, which is, God says, you ain't seen nothing yet. That's what he says. He goes, there's going to be so bad for Pharaoh that he's going to beg you to leave. He's not going to let you go. He's going to drive you out of his land. And so then it begins. God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am Adonai. Now, look, it's a great place to end, and this is a great place to begin, but it's a little bit more confusing than that, which is, what's this about? God just introduced himself to Moses.
That's weird.
So this is a real problem that really is, again, really explainable, as I'll show you in a moment, by the authorship issue. Because right now, it very much seems that we've got a new author that just started off a story. God spoke to Moses and said, I am Adonai, Ani Adonai, which again is the name for God. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but I did not make myself known to them by my name Adonai. Now we read about the burning bush and how God tells Moses, and the people say, who sends you? You say, yeah, Asher, yeah, I'm known as I will be what I will be, or I am what I am. And that's where we get the name Adonai from, which again, every time we see it, it'll say the Hebrew letters, Yud He Vav He, form the tetragrammaton. That says it every time. That's just a link. Adonai, Hashem, all of these words we use to not say God's name. So there's again an introduction to God and God's name. And it says right here, it wasn't just Elohim, but El Shaddai. I appeared to them and I use the name El Shaddai. As we talked about before, we're not really sure what the Shaddai is attached to. Is it God of the mountains? They don't even bother translating it. It's a name. It's a name for God. God was known as El Shaddai. But now I'm going to be known as Adonai. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they lived as sojourners, meaning they did not stay there permanently. They were kind of moving from place to place all throughout the land. They were nomads. I've heard now the moaning of the Israelites because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage. And I've remembered my covenant, which is weird because did you forget the covenant? But I have remembered the covenant. We've heard this language before. Say therefore to the Israelite people, I am Adonai. I will free you from the labors of the Egyptians and deliver you from their bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm through extraordinary chastisements, and I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God. And you shall know that I, Adonai, am your God, who freed you from the labors of the Egyptians. I will bring you to the land which I swore to give Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you for a possession, I, Adonai. So again, Ani Adonai. Now, this seems like, again, almost a step back to this introduction. And the reason is that this seems to be very much so an author who we have not heard from really much in the book of Exodus so far, but it's this yellow. It is the author that we know as the P author, the priestly author. And the priestly author does not use the name Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh either, just like the E author does not use it a lot, or really ever. But there seems to be this recognition by the P author, this priestly author called the P author, who, as you can see, is really responsible for the entire book of Leviticus.
Oh,
It's a priestly author. But there is language here that tells us it's the priestly author. Now, again, one of the things that basically is happening here is that we see that this is an introduction.
but in this case, there's no burning bush.
And there's no burning bush. But essentially the same thing that God said to Moses at the burning bush, which is, I am Adonai, happens here. Why do I show this to you? Because it seems like we heard this before. It doesn't really make sense. I mean, unless Moses forgot, but if you understand this as being a different author, it really does make sense. Because if you look at the last time that we saw the priestly author, you got to go all the way back to chapter 2, which is God heard the cry. And then it makes complete sense why then we jump to here, which is God heard the cry. And then God says, after he hears the cry, God spoke to Moses and said, I'm Adonai. Now you're going to say to yourself, well, how did he appear to Moses? Look, the priestly author doesn't have a burning bush story. And so the editor said, hey, I got a good story. I got the burning bush story. Let's use the burning bush story. The problem is that, like, when you hear this story, you're going to be like, but we already know that he knows this. But there is new information here. You're going to say, well, what's the new information?
What's the new information?
The new information here is that this covenant, this brit, is the backbone of what is happening here. And in this case, there's two things that are going to happen. I'm going to free you from Egypt, and I'm going to take you to the land. And this idea here, which is, it's in the burning bush story. It's not that it's not there, but in the priestly author, that agreement are part and parcel of the same thing. This isn't about just being freed from Egypt. It's going to the land. And when you see it right next to each other, it's very apparent that this is what's happening here. I will tell you something too, which is that this is actually critical for the way the narrative plays out, which is that when you read where P goes from, it goes right from here to the miracles and the plagues. And so maybe it's not so much the information as it is that it goes right from there to there. And there's none of this. If that last part that we just read wasn't in that priestly author, which is that Moses goes before Pharaoh and says, hey, listen, let my people go and let us go to a place to do our worship, then at this point, God and Moses and Pharaoh have never met, even met yet, according to this author, which makes sense. Well, yeah.
What doesn't make sense is how did Moses get back to Egypt if he's still a Midianite?
So here's a problem. Here's a problem. I will show it to you right now. There's nothing about Moses in the Torah. We've gone over this. I said it 2 minutes ago. Again, I don't know how many times I've said it. I say it all the time. Here's the problem. When you recognize what happens here, in the P author, priestly author, we never get that Moses is in Midian.
Oh,
We don't know anything about Moses in the P author, because all we know is that the Israelites are oppressed in chapter 1, that God heard Israel's groan, and now Moses
Oh,
is going.
they really kind of never.
So
left.
we don't know that according to the priestly author, Moses ever didn't live in Egypt. We just don't know. And so we assume that like there was a burning bush or that because we've read the story combined. But if you read the story separated, it's never clear that Moses ever left.
We have to meet Zipporah somewhere.
Look, according to the priestly author, we don't even know Moses has a relationship. We don't even know. So there's so little there, which only to some extent indicates that somebody either didn't want to tell the story, didn't have the story, or basically felt it wasn't important to the story. It wasn't important to our narrative to know anything about Moses. But it just really doesn't make sense because we know things about Abraham. We know things about, and by the way, just so you know, the J author hasn't written anything about Moses. Look at the J author is in green. We don't know anything about him. I think the green author. Yeah, the green author is pink author is J. Pink author has only told us about Moses. No, the J author is the one who's told us about his birth. That's given us the little narrative we had. But I will tell you this: the J author has a whole lot more about Abraham than he has. Look at the J authors in the pink. He has a whole lot more about Abraham than he does about Moses. I mean, this is all the P author in the pink in Genesis over here on this left side here has the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. It has the promise to Sarah. It has the birth of Ishmael. It has Lot. There's all those stories, but you don't have that. And again, it's really only the E author who has Moses actually doing a lot of this himself. I will point out too, look at this. This pink author is the J author. Notice, by the way, when we get to the plagues, I'm going to tell you this a little bit ahead of time so you can keep track. Notice, by the way, there is nothing. The plagues don't exist in the J author. They don't exist. And I'm giving you a little secret already. In this author, you can see in the priestly author, we have the frogs and the gnats. It's really, oh, sorry, the E author has the blood. This author has the second and third. Cattle, hail are in the neck, are back in the E author. Boils are in the P author. Locust, darkness, and the firstborn. The last three plagues are part of the E author, and then P author goes back to Passover. So that means that both authors, you need to have both of them to get to the 10 plagues. And I will tell you, it makes a lot of sense when you read it, but we'll get to that when we get to that. But I just gave you a little thing here. But I basically wanted to show you that the J author doesn't have anything from chapter 5, from what we just read, all the way to chapter 13. There is no J author. And that's like huge, because the J author is throughout the book of Genesis. He's
Getting old.
see that?
The J author.
He's not getting old. He doesn't care about Moses. He doesn't care about him. He doesn't have anything about Moses except this weird story of Moses almost getting killed by an angel or by God.
Yeah.
That's a J story too, by the way. It's a J story.
He's smoking something.
But you can see, this is why this authorship issue does become a critical one in Exodus, because to me, this story of God reappearing or appearing for the first time makes a lot more sense if they have not talked to each other.
Right.
So here it goes. Moses told this to the Israelites. They would not listen to Moses. and their spirits were crushed by cruel bondage. Now, what's interesting about that is that in this case, in the second version of the story, this version, Moses goes to the people and they don't listen to him. Now you could say, well, that makes sense because he just had it backfire. But that's not actually what it says here. They don't listen to him because they don't listen to him. So in both versions, then the thing is the same thing, which is the people don't want to hear from Moses. But in this version, they don't even listen to him the first time that he comes. That's pretty wild. They don't listen to him. It doesn't have any indication that it's because it backfired last time. It's not like he came to them and they said, yeah, look what happened. We got hit by more work. No, here it's just their spirits are crushed by cruel bondage. They don't want to listen. Adonai spoke to Moses saying, go and tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the Israelites depart from this land. But Moses appealed to Adonai saying, the Israelites will not listen to me. How would Pharaoh listen to me? Me, who gets tongue-tied. And so Adonai spoke with Moses and Aaron in regard to the Israelites and Pharaoh, king of Egypt, instructing them to deliver the Israelites from the land of Egypt. So Adonai does not give up and tells them again, you've got to do this. So Moses again is hesitant to do it. That seems to be consistent in both versions of the story. I would say actually in the J version, he doesn't seem to be as scared to do it, but that's not really an issue because we don't have much in that version. But anyways, in the E and P versions, he doesn't seem to want to do this. Now I will tell you, it's also weird, but it's also an indication of something that is very important to the author, this author in particular, which is genealogies. This author is obsessed with genealogies. Who begat who? The following are heads of their respective clans. So this seems to go out of order, or why is this here? But it seems to be again because now we're getting down to business, which is the people are being accounted for because they're about to leave or their process is starting. The sons of Reuben, Israel's firstborn, we had Henoch, Palu, Hezron, Carmi. Those are the families of Reuben. The sons of Shimon, Yemuel, Yamin, Ohad, Yachin, Zohar, and Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman. These are the families of Shimon. So Shimon, as we saw, was married to a Canaanite woman. These are the names of Levi's sons by their lineages. And this is critical, folks. Gershon, Kohat, and Merari. And the span of Levi's life was 137. So here it actually says that Levi lived longer than Joseph. Joseph only lived to be 110. Here, by the way, it didn't say anywhere here how long Shimon or Reuben lived for. It did say that Levi did. And what's important about that is that he lived longer than Joseph. And assumedly, maybe he might not have outlived Joseph because he could have been 27 years older than him, but he died around the same time as Joseph did. And of course, we learn about these three sons that he has. And it says the sons of Gershon were Libni and Shimei by their families. The sons of Kohat were Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uziel. And the span of Kohat's life was 133. Now, what's interesting about this, of course, is we didn't have how long Gershon's life was. We know that Levi lived 137. We know that Kohat lives 133. The sons of Merari, Machli, and Mushi, these are the families of the Levites by their lineage. So Gershon, Kohat, and Merari are the three sons of Levi. We know that Kohat lives 133, and we know that Levi lives 137. That would add up to about 270 years, right? But we only hear about those two people, Levi and Kohat. Guess why? Because that is Moses' family. Amram took into his household as wife his father's sister Yocheved, and she bore him Aaron and Moses. And the span of Amram's life was 137. So Amram lives 137 years. Kohat, his father, lives 133, and his father lived 137. So if you add it up, it comes out to about how long? No. 137 times 2 plus 133. Or if you want to do it this way, it's 270 plus 137. Okay, 130. 270 plus 130. Somebody give me the total. 400 years. It's the 400 years that that God had originally said they're going to be slaves for. The only issue is it was over 3 generations. So the P author wants to tell us how long people lived for. Very important. Numbers are very important to the priestly author. He's obsessed with genealogies and he's obsessed with ages and dimensions. And right now we just got the 400 years through Moses. But it's not 400 years like one after the other after the other. They overlapped. So the 400 years actually isn't 400 years of 400 years from start to finish, right? But we do have 400 years accounted for here. But it's only 3 generations. So on one hand, to get from Levi to his great grandson Moses, you only went 4 generations total. It means the Israelites were slaves for that many generations. However many years, again, say comes out to 400 that way. But it is important because this idea of how long they were slaves for is like a biblical mandate that they were going to be slaves. But it doesn't seem like it was that many generations. And according to this, it wasn't. What else do we want to say? This is the first time that we've actually heard what Moses' father's name was, what his mother's name was. We've heard about them. We read about them in chapter 2, but we never got their names. Their names were not there. We also never heard this kind of weird information that Amram was married to his father's sister. That's a little weird. It's his aunt. Now, even if his aunt was roughly his age, it's still a little weird. But they were all Levites. It's almost as if to say, there's only so many Levites around, and don't worry, Moses was pure Levite on his mother's side and on his father's side. And that's what we got right here, which is that Moses, we now know his father and mother, but we didn't get that information until chapter 6. That is weird. That's weird. The sons of Ishar, Korach, Nepheg, and Zichri. The sons of Uziel, Mishael, Elzaphan, and Sithri. And Aaron took into his household his wife Elisheva, the daughter of Aminadav, and sister of Nachshon, and she bore him Nadav, Avihu, Eleazar, and Itamar. That's very important because these are the first Kohanim. These are the first priests. So we know Aaron's wife's name. Name is Elisheva, Elizabeth. And we know who her parents are, or at least his father. Her father is Aminadav. And we know about this guy, Nachshon, because he's from the tribe of Judah. So what's interesting here is that Aaron is not married to a Levite. He's married to a Judite, which isn't a problem necessarily, but it's almost as if to say, again, here's who Aaron's family was, and who are these other people that were mentioned? These are cousins of Moshe. Izhar is his father's, Amram's brother, and there is Korach, a man that we're going to read about in the Torah. Guess what? This week. That's weird. Because Korach stages the rebellion against Moses, and he's Moses' own cousin. And he's not happy that the priesthood seems to be not his. He's not happy with his role as just being a Levite. A lot of people are going to be talking about Korach this weekend. It's the 4th of July weekend. They're going to be talking about democracy. They're going to be talking about what's happened in our country over the last few days. And everybody is going to be talking about politics this weekend because of Korach. It's the week of Korach. And we just interestingly read about him just now. How poignant, how coincidental that today, of all days, we read who Korach was, Moses's cousin. And there he is. And as we mentioned, there's a composite Korach character in the Ten Commandments, played by Edward G. Robinson, except it's actually Dathan, who is one of the other leaders of the rebellion with Korach. But I have no idea why they decided to use Dathan instead of Korach. I really don't. I don't know why that was a decision that Cecil B. DeMille used. Why did he decide not to call the character Korach and instead use Dathan? It's an interesting question. I don't know. Because Korach is definitely the more famous of them. And one of the reasons we know this is because it says right here, the sons of Korach were Asir, Elkanah, and Abiasaph. Those are the families of the Korachites. Whoever the Korachites were, my friends, it's important enough to know who Korach's kids are. Because we don't know who Uziel's, we don't know who Mishael, Elzaphan, and Sithri's kids are. We don't know who Nepheg and Zichri's kids are. But we do know that Korach had kids. And they're named, and they're called the family of Korach. And we know nothing about them other than it seems as though the family of Korach did not get killed with Korach when Korach gets killed in this week's Torah portion. The rebellion ends with the earth swallowing them up, which is in the Ten Commandments. It's in the movie. The earth opens up and it swallows them up. But it seems as though his own family didn't follow him, which is a very good thing for them. And we know later on that there are psalms that are attributed to the sons of Korach. So there's an interesting lesson there, which is that just because your father is not a good person doesn't mean that you have to not be a good person. So Korach's kids are mentioned here.
But we never hear about them again.
Other than they're in the Psalms. There's Korach, there's the Psalms. But clearly they were important enough that we read about them because they're also there with Aaron's sons. So the B'nai Korach were important. They were important. Aaron's sons, Eleazar, took into his wife, right? It says, wife, one of Putiel's daughters, and she bore him Pinchas. Those are the heads of the ancestral houses of the Levites by their families. Now we know about later on Pinchas, right? He is Aaron's grandson, and he's the one who's going to inherit the priesthood. Of all the family, it goes through, ends up because Nadav and Avihu are killed. It goes through Eleazar. Remember, there's another son too, right? There's 4 sons that Aaron has. You can see, right? He has 4 sons. I went too far. You can see it's got Nadav, Avihu, Eleazar, and Itamar. But it's Eleazar because he's the third. Nadav and Avihu are killed. He becomes the one in charge. And then Eleazar, we know even what his wife's name is because he is going to have, well, we don't know his wife's name, but we know her father's name, I should say. She's Bat Putiel. And she has Pinchas. So now we've just had an accounting of all the important people that we're going to read about in Leviticus and Numbers. The Bible just gave us a genealogy through this P author. Who are the characters that we have to pay attention to? They skipped over a whole lot of people, but he got to the people that you need to know.
It's just weird.
Here's your cast of characters.
It's weird when they put this.
Of course it's weird. In chapter 6.
Yeah.
You were gone when I mentioned that. We get to chapter 6. And this is when we finally get this list of names. But what's weird is that we should have had these names before. Some of these we wanted in chapter 2.
Sure.
But some of them we're not going to get till the next books of the Bible. So what's weird about this is that it's thrown in here, which covers what we didn't have before, but it also gives us information for what we need in the future, because it's mentioning people to some extent. I wouldn't say they're necessarily not born yet. No, they could have all been born. I mean, Aaron could have been a grandfather by the time he left, right? So the fact that it mentions Eleazar and Pinchas, his son and grandson, he definitely would have been a father by the time he left. Would he have been a grandfather? Maybe, maybe not. So maybe Pinchas was born in the wilderness, but he definitely seems old enough when we get to Parshat Pinchas, which is named after him, that he's enforcing God's law and killing these people that are reverting back to paganism. The point is that we get this information, which is important for the future. We got information from the past and we get information for the future here. Again, maybe they're all born by this point, but we get it here. Here's the genealogy. So it is the same Aaron and Moses to whom Adonai said, bring forth the Israelites out of the land of Egypt, troop by troop. That's kind of a weird line. Of course it is. That's why you just gave us this list of genealogy. It was they who spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to free the Israelites from the Egyptians. These are the same Moses. Oh yeah, the ones you just talked about. But again, it makes sense if it's a new author, a different author that we haven't read yet, that's now giving us these genealogies. Then it makes sense. For when Adonai spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt, and Adonai said to Moses, I am Adonai, speak to the Pharaoh, king of Egypt, all that I will tell you. Right? And Moses appealed to Adonai, see, I get tongue-tied. How then should Pharaoh heed me? Now, all of this seems repetitive, other than the fact that this tradition that Moses did not want to speak in front of people is indicated by everybody. And it is an important part of the story, and it's an important part of who Moses was, and that he didn't want to do it. Now, that's the end of chapter 6. But what's so weird about chapter 6 is that roughly half of it, verses 14 through 27, out of the 30 verses, half the verses are genealogies. Look, as I said, I was probably 25, 30 before I realized that's not normal. Like, I don't know. Like, I never really thought about it. I never really thought about the fact that we never really hear who Moses' father and mother are until chapter 6. I guess I always realized or always thought that it was like that until I sat with that and was kind of somebody said, it's chapter 6. So there's the information. I do want to read a little bit more, but we can't read all of chapter 7 because, as I said before, this is where we start to get the plagues. The plagues. Yeah. So we will start, and again, according to this, we'll read the first part of this. But as you can see, this goes back to the priestly author. So it makes sense. This, by the way, is the gray is the redactor, the editor. He basically saying that those last few verses where it says about tongue-tied and speaking to the Egypt, that's not the P author, which I agree with. I'm not so sure it's the redactor, the editor, but it seems to be repetitive, or however somebody wanted to put it in as a reminder. Look, let's read the beginning of this chapter 7. And it says that Adonai, which again, bad break. So I have to read more because this is the middle of a discussion. Adonai replied to Moses, see, I place you in the role of God to Pharaoh with your brother Aaron as your prophet. You shall repeat all that I command you, and your brother Aaron shall speak to Pharaoh to let the Israelites depart from his land. But I will harden the Pharaoh's heart, that I may multiply my signs and marvels in the land of Egypt. And there is the first time that we've had this phrase like this, which is, I will harden Pharaoh's heart. And why is it there? So that I may multiply my signs and marvels in the land of Egypt. So what's interesting about this is, at least the way the Torah presents it here, God is purposely hardening Pharaoh's heart so that God will be able to do these miracles. That's what it says. I'm going to put on a show.
No, but it's more, I always thought of this when I read that. Wait, but the way I look at it is, it's almost like punishing the Egyptians for what, by putting the Hebrews in bondage in Israel.
Well, he definitely is punishing them, right?
Yeah, and he doesn't want to punish them just with one plague, he wants to punish them.
Yes, but at least part of this punishment seems to be, at least the way the Torah is telling us, is so that people can see how powerful God is.
That too.
And again, one of the things that we know of is that any great superhero is only great if the villain is also very good. And so how does that happen? Because the more powers that the superhero has to use in order to defeat the bad guy, the more amazed we are at that superhero. And God is very much, in this case, playing the role of making sure that everybody knows how powerful God is. Because God is now going to demonstrate that the Egyptians, who are the most powerful people of the world, are no match for me. And it says that God is literally going to make sure that that happens, because Pharaoh will not listen. I am making sure that it will happen. God says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart. Now, again, people get very upset with the theological implications of this, which it seems that Pharaoh is a tool, is a pawn in this, and doesn't have any say. I can only tell you that's what the Torah says. And as we just said, there's a bigger issue here, which is that God's been telling people for generations, all the way back to Abraham, that they're going to be slaves in Egypt. It's all been foretold. And we read just today that God said to Moses, at least in a different, maybe it's in a different author, but still, no matter what, before it happens, I'm going to kill the firstborn.
Oh, that's right, he does say that.
Yeah.
So there's no question that whatever the theological implications are for it, and again, that could be our reason for having an issue with it, our ancestors and the way the story presents itself by the authors, by the compilation of it, by everything, is there is no other way for this to happen. There is no way that this can be changed. There is no off-ramp for Pharaoh to get off before he gets hit. And there is nothing other than, in this case, this is going to happen. This has been scripted. People have a problem with that. I know. People don't like the fact that they know what's going to happen before it happens. But it happens sometimes. And sometimes, again, usually we're not aware of it before it happens, where we go, this is the way this is going to, we don't like that, because it goes against our sense of free will and the fact that we can control our own destiny. We don't like to know that it's been foretold. And Judaism doesn't really spend a lot of time telling people, and we definitely don't believe or teach that everything is pre-written or predestined. We don't talk about that. We don't teach that a lot. So this goes against kind of what we talk about a lot. But sometimes we go to a movie or we go to a play or a musical, or we read a book, and the whole thing's a flashback. And to some extent, every time you go to see a movie about something that you already know what the outcome's going to be, you already know what's going to happen. If you go see, I don't know, Hamilton, you know that we're going to win the Revolutionary War and we're going to be free. When you go to see, I don't know, when you go to look, I don't want to make stupid examples, but when you go watch a Star Wars movie that's going to tell you how Anakin Skywalker becomes Darth Vader, you know he's going to be Darth Vader. You already know it. You bought into it that you want to see it. But sometimes there's stories we know how they're going to end. This story, we know how it's going to end. It's weird that we tell those stories, by the way. It's weird that the Bible tells a story that we know how it's going to end before it ends. But it did, and we do it sometimes. By the way, one of the great musicals that's come out in the last 5-10 years is Hadestown. You've heard of Hadestown, right?
No.
Hadestown has won a bunch of Tony Awards. It's basically the Greek myth of Orpheus and Persephone and Hades. So if you like Greek mythology, it's really good. It's great music. It's a great musical. And the whole story essentially there is, you know how they tell you right up the beginning, this is a tragedy, which is very much what the Greeks did when a great Greek playwright wrote a tragedy. You knew it was a tragedy. You knew it was going to end sad. You know, by the way, when you go see Romeo and Juliet, they're going to die at the end. I'm not ruining it for anybody. It's going to happen. Les Miserables, you know what's going to happen. They're all going to die. You know that these things are going to happen. So you sign up for a tragedy, you know what's going to happen. But we still tell the story. And that's the song. That's the message of Hadestown. Why do we tell these stories that we know they're going to end sad? And they come out in the beginning. They say, you're going to see a sad story. And then at the end, they kind of explain or at least give an interpretation of why we tell these stories that are going to end in a sad way. So I recommend it highly. I recommend Hadestown strongly if you ever have a chance to see it. But I do want to say that just because this story gives us a story where we know what's going to happen, it doesn't mean that Judaism teaches that every story is going to happen this way. But every time we read these stories, to some extent, we know how they're going to end. But we still read them. And we still see something new in them that we didn't see the last time. When Pharaoh does not heed you, I will lay my hand upon Egypt and deliver my ranks, my people, the Israelites, from the land of Egypt with extraordinary chastisements, and the Egyptians shall know that I am Adonai when I stretch out my hand over Egypt and bring out the Israelites from their midst. Then Moses and Aaron did as Adonai commanded them, and so they did. I'll read you one more verse. I don't want to end it, but I'm going to. And Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 83 when they made their demand on Pharaoh. So we know that they're 120 when they die and 123 roughly when they die. We read about Aaron's death in Chukat, which is next week's Torah portion.
Really? Already?
Yeah. But Moses and Aaron, even though Aaron is older than Moses, they die within a few weeks of each other because Moses is going to die right after that. And Miriam dies in the same portion as Aaron. They both die in Chukat. But what we know is that if the Israelites are in the wilderness for 40 years, then this last period of time that they are getting ready to go and leave happens fairly quick. So people say, how long did the plagues last for? They really can't last for more than a year. Because if Moses is 80 years old, then it had to happen before another year would have passed. Otherwise, they would have been in the wilderness for 39 years and not 40 years. So it's got to be within a year. Maybe it was a long time, a few months, maybe it was several weeks. But I will tell you, it was not years based on what we just read. And of course, one of the most important takeaways is that even if Moses, and we know he lives to be 120, whatever the takeaway is, Joanne says, so it's a symbolic number, right? But what we know is that he's in the last 2/3 of his life when he does this. So if Moses is 120 when he dies, and most of us don't assume we'll get to 120, but even if we get to 90 or 100, it means that Moses undertakes this huge job that we really only learn about. We haven't learned about anything over the last 80 years of his life. How long was he in Midian for? Now it seems like he was in Midian for decades, at least if we do the math here. Look, what we're left with is that Moses spends the last third of his life as the leader of the Israelites out of Egypt, which means do the math. If you're thinking you got 70, 80 years, maybe 90 years, it means if you're 60 and you're going to live 30 more years in your mind, you can still do some pretty cool things in that last third of your life. Because Moses surely did a really big thing the last third of his life. So is he a senior citizen when he does it? Sure seems like it. So if we get 20, 30 years of retirement, it doesn't have to be time where we go, I can't do anything now. Because Moses, no matter what, and again, I don't want people to focus on that. It's 120. No one lives to be 120. Whatever. Somebody right here has told us that Moses' last third of his life is the most productive of his life, because he doesn't do anything in the first 2/3 that we read about. We read nothing about his life. We read more about the argument over how much dirt that they have how much mortar they have, and we read about his birth and his whole life. More verses on that. But we know a whole lot about what happens in the next 40 years of his life, because the rest of the book of Exodus is about that, which is another 30 chapters. The whole book of Leviticus, the whole book of Numbers, and the whole book of Deuteronomy. My friends, 2/3 of the Bible is in the last third of his life, of the Torah, not the Bible, the Torah. The last third of the Torah, the last 2/3 of the Torah are the last third of his life, Moses' life. In 40 years of his life, we're going to read the next parts of the Bible through the Torah, through Deuteronomy. So don't anybody tell me you can't do anything after you retire. Don't tell me you can't do anything once you hit 60 or 70. Because Moses doesn't do anything of note. And what he does is arguably the most important thing in human history, which is get the Israelites out of Egypt and lead them to the promised land. It's definitely the most important thing in the Torah. It's 4/5 of the Torah. So we'll finish with that, folks. Nobody should tell me or tell themselves that they can't get anything done in retirement. Take care, everybody. Enjoy Ben & Jerry's. And as Mike has told us, the Dodgers won convincingly, right? It's pretty convincing after losing the last two. All right, folks, take care. We'll see you. We will be online next week. Only virtual next week.
Why?
Thank you.
When do you leave?
I will leave, but I'm leaving in stages. Anyways, I won't be here next week. I won't be in town, but I will be here. We'll be online the next 2 weeks, folks. Next 2 weeks. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
You got to get something from me. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, bye. Bye, everybody. We'll see. We need a Hebrew name. Bye.